"Get that beast away from the headstone before I call the marshals," the groundskeeper roared, shoving a shovel toward Malik. Malik's grip tightened on the leash as Jaxon, a veteran K9, tore into the sacred earth of his former handler's grave with a desperate, frantic energy. It looked like a disgrace, a desecration of a hero's rest, but Malik saw the terror in the dog's eyes. Jaxon wasn't mourning. He was signaling a lethal threat hidden beneath the soil that was seconds away from a catastrophe. The humidity in the air felt like a damp wool blanket as Malik adjusted the leather lead in his hand. It was a Tuesday, the kind of quiet Tuesday afternoon, where the only sound in the memorial park was the distant hum of a lawnmower. By his side, Jaxon, a black and tan German shepherd, with graying fur around his snout, paced with a rhythm that felt heavy. Malik wasn't just here as a tourist. He was a K9 officer, and the patch on his shoulder caught the glint of the unforgiving sun. They were here for a ritual. It had been exactly 365 days since Sergeant Elias Vance was laid into the red clay of this hillside. Vance hadn't just been Malik's mentor. He was the man who had first put Jackson's leash in Malik's hand. As they approached the section of the cemetery reserved for civil servants, Jackson's ears, usually pinned back in a submissive mourning stance, suddenly snapped forward. Malik felt a sharp tug on the line. This wasn't the usual behavior. Usually, the old dog would lay his head on the cool granite of Vance's headstone and let out a long, pathetic sigh that broke Malik's heart every single time. But today, Jackson's posture was stiff, his hackles rising like a row of jagged glass along his spine. Malik stopped 10 feet from the grave. "Jaxon, sit," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. The dog ignored him. It was a small thing, but for a highly trained service animal, it was a glaring red flag. Jaxon began to circle the plot, his nose pressed so hard into the grass that Malik could hear the wet, frantic snuffling of his breathing. Then, without warning, the dog exploded into action. He began to paw at the earth. He wasn't just scratching. He was excavating, his powerful claws tearing through the pristine sod that the groundskeepers worked so hard to maintain. Malik lunged forward, grabbing the harness. "Jaxon, knock it off," he hissed. He looked around, feeling that sharp prickle of embarrassment. A few yards away, an elderly woman in a black veil looked up from her prayers, her eyes wide with disapproval. "You can't have that beast digging up the dead, son," a voice boomed from behind. It was Miller, the head groundskeeper, a man whose skin looked like cured leather, and whose patience was notoriously thin. He was wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. "I'm sorry, Miller, he's just..." Malik trailed off. Jaxon wasn't listening. The dog let out a sharp, piercing yelp and lunged back at the dirt, his teeth actually snapping at the air as if he were trying to bite something invisible lurking beneath the soil. It wasn't a play behavior. It was the high-intensity alert Jaxon used when he found something that shouldn't be there. Malik felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his neck. He knew this dog. He had seen Jaxon find a stash of blasting caps hidden in a sewer pipe 3 years ago. This wasn't grief. This was a warning. Miller stepped closer, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel path. "I don't care if he's a hero or a house pet. You get him under control, or I'm calling the precinct. This is a place of rest, not a dog park." Malik didn't answer. He knelt in the dirt, ignoring the grass stains on his dress blues. He watched Jackson's eyes. They were dilated, flicking toward the base of Sergeant Vance's headstone. The dog began a low, guttural vibration in his chest that Malik felt in his own teeth. "Wait, Miller. Look at his tail," Malik whispered. It was tucked, but vibrating. Jaxon was terrified. A police dog trained to face down gunmen was trembling in front of a grave. Malik leaned in closer to the hole Jaxon had started. He didn't smell the metallic tang of blood or the rot of the earth. Instead, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sweet scent, like overripe fruit left in a hot car. The crowd began to grow. People love a tragedy, but they love a spectacle even more. A young couple stopped their walk, the man holding a phone up to record the scene. "Look at that dog go," he muttered. "He's trying to get his master back." The commentary stung. Malik felt the injustice of it. People seeing a circus where he saw a crisis. He stood up, his face set. "Miller, call the fire department. Tell them we have a code orange at the Vance plot." Miller scoffed, tossing his rag onto a nearby bench. "A code orange? For a dog having a bad day? You've lost your mind, kid." Malik grabbed the man's forearm, his grip firm. "I'm not asking. My dog is alerting to a Class 1 hazard. If I'm wrong, I'll pay for the sod and take the suspension. If I'm right, this whole hill is a bomb." The silence that followed was heavy. Jaxon sat back on his haunches finally, letting out a single, mournful howl that echoed off the surrounding hills. It wasn't a cry for the dead. It was a signal to the living. Malik checked his watch. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, distorted shadows across the graves. He knew the clock was ticking, though he didn't yet know what for. He just knew that Jaxon never lied. The blue and red strobes of the emergency vehicles danced across the weathered marble of the surrounding tombstones, turning the somber memorial park into something resembling a high-stakes crime scene. Malik stood his ground, his hand firmly on Jaxon's harness, feeling the dog's muscles twitch with a rhythmic, anxious energy. By now, the small crowd of onlookers had been pushed back behind a hastily unrolled perimeter of yellow tape. The air, which had been thick and stagnant, now carried the sharp, ozone tang of professional equipment being powered on. Chief Miller hadn't just called the fire department. He'd called the city's specialized subterranean response team. A man named Elias, a veteran technician with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that had seen every structural failure the city had to offer, stepped off the truck. He didn't look at Malik first. He looked at Jaxon. "That the dog that's been causing the ruckus?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to settle the dog slightly. "He's not causing a ruckus, Elias. He's sounding an alarm," Malik replied, his voice tight. He felt the weight of the skepticism around him. To the city officials who had just arrived, he was just a young officer with an overactive imagination and a grief-stricken dog. But Malik knew better. Jaxon was currently in a rigid point. His nose wasn't just near the ground. It was locked onto a specific coordinate beneath Sergeant Vance's headstone, with a level of focus that was almost supernatural. Elias grunted and began unloading a ground-penetrating radar (GPR) unit. It looked like a high-tech lawnmower, a boxy device designed to see through the secrets of the earth. "We'll see what the dirt says," Elias muttered. As he began to sweep the device over the area Jaxon had been clawing, the atmosphere shifted. The casual gossip of the bystanders died down. Even the groundskeeper, Miller, stood silent, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in a hard line. Malik watched the monitor on the side of the GPR unit. At first it was just the usual chaotic fuzz of tree roots and packed clay. But then, as Elias moved the sensor directly over the center of the plot, the screen flashed a deep, jagged purple. A massive, amorphous void appeared on the display, hovering nearly 7 feet below the surface. It wasn't a coffin, and it wasn't a vault. It was a pocket of nothingness that was growing in real time. "Lord have mercy," Elias whispered, his fingers flying across the calibration buttons. "That's a pressure cavity. The soil down there isn't just loose, it's being displaced by something high velocity." He looked up at Malik, the skepticism gone, replaced by a cold, professional dread. "Your dog didn't just find a hole, Malik. He found a rupture." Suddenly, a loud metallic clack echoed through the cemetery. It was the sound of the heavy granite headstone of Sergeant Vance shifting. Because the earth beneath it was being hollowed out, the massive stone was beginning to tilt. The injustice of the situation hit Malik like a physical blow. His mentor's final resting place was literally being swallowed by an invisible force, and if they didn't act, the entire hillside could collapse into whatever void was forming. "Get the thermal imagers," Elias shouted to his crew. The technicians moved with a new, frantic speed. They deployed infrared sensors around the perimeter of the grave. The readings were impossible. While the surrounding earth was a steady 70 degrees, the area directly under the grave was spiking into the hundreds. There was a heat source down there, a friction-based energy that was cooking the soil from the inside out. The neighborhood beyond the cemetery walls was starting to notice. Lights were flicking on in the nearby houses, and the distant sound of police sirens grew louder as the department began blocking off the adjacent streets. The sweet scent Malik had noticed earlier was now undeniable. It was the cloyingly heavy smell of mercaptan, the odorant added to natural gas to make the invisible killer detectable to the human nose. But here, deep in the soil, it had been filtered and concentrated until it smelled like rotting fruit. "The main supply line," Elias said, his voice trembling slightly. There's an old 30-inch transmission main that runs the perimeter of this park. It's not even on the updated city maps, but it's there. If that line has a pinhole leak, it's sandblasting the earth away, creating an explosive pocket right under our feet. Malik felt Jaxon lean heavily against his leg. The dog was whining now, a high-pitched, distressed sound that made Malik's heart ache. Jaxon knew the scale of the danger long before the machines did. He had smelled the molecules of disaster rising through the grass. "We need an emergency excavation permit now," Malik shouted to a city official who had just pulled up in a black sedan. "We can't just dig up a hero's grave on a hunch and a dog's bark," the official retorted, trying to maintain some semblance of red tape. Malik stepped into the man's space, his shadow looming large under the floodlights. "Look at the screen. Look at my dog. If you wait for a permit, you won't need one, because there won't be a cemetery left to manage. This is a ticking bomb, and the only reason we're standing here is because Jaxon refused to let us walk away." The official looked from the frantic dog to the jagged purple void on the radar screen. He pulled out a radio. "This is Unit 1. We have a Level 5 environmental crisis at Pinecrest. Authorize immediate breach. I want the gas company here 5 minutes ago." The heavy thud of an excavator being unloaded from a flatbed truck vibrated through the ground. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like it could spark on its own. Malik looked at the headstone of his friend, tilting further into the dark. The investigation was over. The battle for the neighborhood had begun. The roar of the excavator's engine cut through the heavy silence of the cemetery like a jagged blade. Malik stood back, his hand gripping Jaxon's harness so tight his knuckles turned a ghostly white. The neighborhood behind the memorial park was now a ghost town of its own. The police had finished the frantic door-to-door evacuations, leaving only the eerie glow of the floodlights and the rhythmic thud hiss of the hydraulic machinery. Jaxon had stopped whining. He was sitting perfectly still now, his amber eyes locked onto the bucket of the machine as it bit into the earth of Sergeant Vance's plot. It was as if the dog knew the climax of the story had arrived. The operator, a man named Marcus with grease-stained overalls and a focused squint, was moving at a snail's pace. This wasn't a standard construction dig. It was a surgical extraction. Every time the steel teeth of the bucket scraped against a rock, a collective shiver went through the small huddle of experts. They were 6 feet down now, deep enough to see the concrete outer vault that protected the sergeant's casket. But the excavator didn't hit the vault. Instead, as the bucket pulled back a fresh layer of red clay, a thick, white mist began to hiss out of the ground. "Stop! Shut it down!" Elias screamed, his voice cracking with pure adrenaline. The engine died instantly. In the sudden, ringing silence, the sound of the hiss was terrifyingly loud. It sounded like a giant serpent coiled beneath the graves. The team turned pale as their handheld sensors began to shriek in a high-pitched, steady tone. They didn't need the machines to tell them anymore. The air above the open grave began to shimmer and distort, a heat haze of invisible energy that made the headstone look like it was vibrating. Malik watched as Marcus, the operator, scrambled out of his cab, his face drained of all color. He didn't even use the ladder, he jumped. "That's not just a leak," Marcus panted, his chest heaving. "That's a full structural failure of the main. The pressure is blowing the dirt out from the inside." The only thing that was holding that gas down was the weight of the sergeant's vault. The injustice of it all felt heavy in Malik's chest. The city had allowed an unmapped, corroded, high-pressure line to sit beneath a place of rest for decades. It was corporate and civic negligence that had turned a sanctuary into a kill zone. If Jaxon hadn't acted, if he had just been a good dog and sat quietly by the grave as he was told, the pressure would have eventually hit a breaking point. A single spark from a mower, a dropped cigarette from a mourner, or even the friction of the shifting earth would have leveled the entire hillside, vaporizing the memorial and the homes bordering it in a heartbeat. Elias and his hazmat crew moved in with non-sparking hand shovels, their movements deliberate and slow. They cleared the last few inches of soil by hand, revealing a pipe that was rusted to the color of dried blood. There was a jagged, inch-wide fissure in the steel. The gas was roaring out with such force that it was actually freezing the surrounding mud into strange crystalline structures. "We've got it," Elias radioed in, his voice trembling. "Initialize the bypass. Shut down the perimeter valves at Sector 4. Do it now." For the next 20 minutes, time seemed to stretch into infinity. Malik watched the shimmering air. He thought about Sergeant Vance. The man had spent his life protecting this city, often putting himself in the line of fire to keep strangers safe. It felt poetic, in a dark, twisted way, that the very ground he was buried in had tried to cause one last catastrophe, only to be stopped by the partner he had trained so well. As the hissing finally faded into a low whistle, and then, eventually, into nothing, the tension in the cemetery broke. The fire chief walked over to Malik, removing his helmet to wipe a layer of grime and sweat from his forehead. He looked at Jaxon, who was finally leaning his head against Malik's knee, his tail giving a single, exhausted wag. "Officer," the chief said, looking Malik in the eye. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen sensors fail, I've seen engineers miss the mark, and I've seen maps lie. But I have never seen a dog pull a neighborhood back from the brink of an explosion like that. You don't just have a partner there. You have a miracle." The aftermath was a whirlwind. The gas company was looking at a massive investigation and a lawsuit that would likely reach into the millions. But for Malik, the victory was smaller and more personal. He watched as the crews began the long process of stabilizing the earth and resetting Sergeant Vance's headstone. As the first hints of dawn began to gray the horizon, Malik led Jaxon back to the patrol car. The dog jumped into the back seat, circled 3 times and let out a deep, satisfied sigh. The mystery of the barking dog was solved, and the secret buried beneath the grave had been silenced. Malik looked back at the cemetery one last time. The hero's rest had been disturbed, but because of it, hundreds of others would wake up in their beds just a few yards away, never knowing how close they had come to the end. He started the engine, the low hum of the car a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the night. Jaxon was already asleep, his duty done. Jaxon's unwavering intuition turned a routine visit to a hero's grave into a life-saving mission for an entire community. While the maps were wrong and the experts were skeptical, the bond between a handler and his dog proved to be the most accurate sensor in the world. Sergeant Vance's legacy didn't end with his service. It lived on through the dog he trained, ensuring that even in his final resting place, he was still watching over the city he loved. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories of heroic discoveries.